Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Moses Itauma has had a dilemma of late. He needs rounds, he needs good opponents, and one was put on a platter for him in the form of Frank Sanchez for the IBF final Eliminator, but he turned it down, has rejected that fight, and the question becomes, why? Frank Sanchez is a good opponent, would have been a good opponent, but it's not going to come to pass. And this was broken by Sky Sports. And quite interesting with this IBF Eliminator, because you had F.A. Ajagba. He was meant to be facing Frank Sanchez. He has turned down that fight. I can understand that to some extent, because Ajagba previously fought Sanchez, was absolutely bossed. But what we now have, and I'll come to this a little bit later, so Frank Sanchez, he's saying something coming soon, and that could be in the form of Richard Torrez, because Torrez is the next guy that has been called. But we'll come to that in a moment. But in terms of the story itself, Moses Itauma rejects IBF final Eliminator that would have earned a fight against Alexander Usyk. And it's important to note from the get-go that the IBF was not next in the run of belts that Usyk would have to defend as a mandatory. The next is the WBO, and Moses Itauma is firmly atop that. But at the moment, we have an interim champion, Joseph Parker, who's going to be fighting Fabio Wardley. So presumably, the winner of that fight will be in line to face Alexander Usyk. So that's why you kind of go, well, what's really going on here? Because staying with the WBO doesn't necessarily get you that title shot next. Even with Turki Al Sheikh, who has been sort of saying that Usyk should face Moses Itauma, the young 20-year-old. So what to make of all this? And the story here quoted Mike Burrell, the manager for Frank Sanchez, just a week or so ago, saying we're waiting to hear back, yada, yada, yada. Then they'd be ordered to negotiate, etc. And Torrez, who is now next up after Itauma, after he dropped that. So what to make of it? Because Moses Itauma clearly needs good rounds, and he's not getting them at the moment, because 13-0, 11 KOs, number 18 in the world, apparently, according to BoxRec. Some of that would have come from, taking Dillian Whyte's washed soul in his last fight. And you look at what's happened in the past couple of years, since a couple of tougher journeyman-level fight earlier in his career against Doboshenko and Espindola. There hasn't been much to write home about in terms of the action, in terms of the number of rounds and what he's really learning in there. A few flashy knockouts, Dempsey McKean, good win. Dillian Whyte, I mean, as I said, I was expecting him to walk through him, and he did. And I know some people were surprised by that, but Whyte absolutely washed to pieces, took a payday there, is going to fight on, a little bit surprisingly perhaps. But he hasn't been super active. You know, Mike Belligan and Dillian Whyte, both pretty faded at this point. And the question becomes, well, what are they really planning to do? There's the Chisora card apparently going to happen in December, where Itauma would be the co-main event. Perhaps they've decided, well, we'll have another guy against him, and it's not going to be Frank Sanchez. That kind of feels like that could headline on its own, but perhaps Itauma, maybe they're saying for a big venue in the UK, maybe not quite ready for that. But in terms of his next step in his career, he needs someone durable, someone can take him rounds, and actually Frank Sanchez, I think, would have been perfect, especially if it's a healthy Frank Sanchez. And if we just go back to that story, what did he say here? It was his manager, Mike Burrell. Torres' explosive would make for an entertaining fight. Frank notified the IBF he is available no matter the opponent. Frank is determined will become IBF mandatory challenger. Boxers are not lining up to fight a healthy Frank Sanchez. And perhaps that comes into it, because against Frank Sanchez versus Agi Cabial, Cabial bossed that one, and Sanchez clearly had some sort of knee injury. And if he is right, he's a much harder guy to beat. And F.A. Ajagba found that out the hard way. He literally was absolutely dominated by Frank Sanchez, who made him put his right hand away and got dropped in that fight as well. So in terms of Itauma, it's a question mark because they keep telling us he's ready, but we're not really sort of seeing it. And if he fights certain level of opponents like Mike Belligan, Dillian White, and say for argument's sake, if it ends up being Jermaine Franklin, it's certain types of opponents who aren't necessarily quick on their feet at this stage of their career, or in Franklin's case, he's not the same level of mover as a Frank Sanchez. It's a very different style matchup. And I think Mike Burrell on Sanchez's behalf said potentially it indicates that Itauma's a little bit green for him. And I think it's a really interesting fight. And perhaps they were like, well, there's a lot of risk there for a guy that really hasn't had any rounds lately, who's been looking good, but has effectively had about 10 rounds in the last couple of years. Since 2023 or the start of 2024, he's collectively only had about 8 or 9 rounds so far. So, he really does need some rounds, some adversity, some lessons, some in-ring learning, and they're going to have to, especially now at 13-0 and the expectations starting to skyrocket, actually do something with him where we can start to see him pushed a little bit more. And I would have thought if they truly believe that he's ready, why not go for that mandatory guaranteed shot? And if they think he's good enough, then he's old enough. And Frank Sanchez, I think some people would say Itauma in terms of that matchup, would fare pretty well. Obviously, it's a big step up from, the washbones of White and recently Mike Belligan as well. But also, if he is that good, then he should be able to, is it a sink or swim situation? But clearly not at this point. But there could be other factors here as well. Perhaps they were going this other way. Perhaps they think something's going to pop up in the WBO at some point after Parker and Wardley. Perhaps something's going to happen there. Perhaps Usyk drops a belt. Maybe he's in line for something there. In terms of F.A. Ajagba, I just kind of think his management must have been like Frank Sanchez. Well, been there, done that, got an absolute beating. We can go another direction. I think Ajagba's gotten better, and he's legitimately a top sort of 15 to 20 type guy, but certain style matchups not in his favour, and Sanchez is one of those, especially a healthy Sanchez. But in terms of Richard Torrez and a Frank Sanchez, I mean, this is also in that same sort of league where Torrez is stepping up and progressively looking better and better. And I think arguably 13-0, Moses Itauma is 13-0. Torrez has been managed much better in terms of the gradual step-ups and the opponents and getting some rounds and action and in-ring experience. That fight with Guido Vianello, a very good litmus test. Vianello has proven in the last couple of years to be a very competent and capable sort of top 25, top 30 guy. And you had Torrez going in there and absolutely, being in control. Currently number 14 in the world, apparently. So you have a situation where him and Frank Sanchez, who is ranked number 20 in the world according to BoxRec, it's a pretty decent fight, and I think that would be quite entertaining, especially with Torrez. But Torrez did show a few more wrinkles in that Vianello fight, just not mindlessly sort of coming in, head down, burrowing in, which we had seen perhaps earlier in his career. But, you do have a situation where Torrez, I think maybe his ceiling is lower than potentially Itauma's, but perhaps he is ready for this sort of fight as well. And Frank Sanchez, he's not a huge heavyweight. He is very skilled. He can move well. He's got a bit of power in that right hand. But I do think certain style matchups, and we saw against Agit Kabayel, he's not, perhaps as dominant, or in certain matchups, he's not going to be nearly as dominant as he had in, say, against the Ajagba fight, style smack fights, as they say. But I like that if they make it. And on his Instagram, and this is only 5 hours ago as I record this, announcement coming soon. So if this ends up being a case of Frank Sanchez versus Richard Torrez, great fight. Really, it's a huge step up for Torrez. He's really sort of going, okay, my apprenticeship is really over. I'm taking another step up. And he is very self-confident, believes in himself. In terms of Itauma, maybe because it's been so lackluster, they just realised that he's underdone. It could be that simple. I know some people were hoping that White would give him some rounds, but he's looked terrible in recent years. The matchmaking, apart from that McKean fight, hasn't been flash the last couple of years. Not at all. So Itauma, he needs more. He needs something. He needs rounds, that's for sure. What do you make of this situation? Itauma ducks Sanchez. Could be good reason for it, but at the same time, needs rounds. People say he's ready. What was wrong with that fight? I think that would have been a very good one. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.